John says this, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love." This can happen in our outreach also. As one writer put it, don't trample all over the great commandment, love of God and your neighbor, trying to obey the Great Commission, making disciples. This sometimes happens with new and zealous young Christians who try to convince family and friends of the importance of becoming Christians. We need to remember that part of our message is our manner. Part of our message is our manner, and people will remember how we came across as much as what we said. Often, people need to see a life of love in order to receive the message of God's love. One of the best ways to tell people of the love of Christ is to show them the love of Christ. Lead people to Jesus by loving people to Jesus, which usually takes time. We like to see things happen quickly. But to show the love of God to people takes time and involvement, and always takes the supernatural power of Christ. So I would say, remember the Great Commandment as you seek to carry out the Great Commission. Actually, the Great Commission, as it's called, has to do with making disciples, baptizing converts, and teaching the precepts of Christ. If you look at the section that's usually called the Great Commission, that's what it's talking about. Making disciples, baptizing converts, and teaching the precepts of Christ, which is largely done within the context of the gathering of believers in the local fellowship, in the church. So there's a couple things I think new believers should understand related to the local church. First of all, perfection is not of this world. If you look for a perfect church with perfect people, you won't find one. As one person said, if you found one and joined it, it wouldn't be perfect anymore. Only Christ is perfect. And He is perfecting His church and will partly perfect you through being in fellowship with imperfect people. That's one of the ways He does it. Now let me say something about how we view Christians who go to other churches that do things differently than we do. It sometimes happens that new believers who become part of a church that they're excited about begin to view the way their church does things as the most true type of Christianity. They may not think that they're the only Christians in town, but they do think that they're the best or the most right ones. This is a prideful attitude, something we need to guard against. It goes against the spirit of unity that should be present in the body of Christ throughout the world. I'm talking about the body of Christ throughout the world. There should be a desire and a sense of unity amongst God's people. It's counter to what Paul said about being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Looking back on my early Christian life, there was a time when if I met a believer from a different group or went to a different church, I was looking for things we differed in. That was just kind of my antennas were up for that type of thing. Where are they different than my thinking in my group? Usually with kind of an attitude deep down that our way or my way of seeing things is closer to God's way. I came to see that this is very sectarian and a divisive attitude, and it's much better to try to look for and appreciate the things that we agree on. If you look for the negative, you can always find some. Always. But I doubt if that's what Christ wants his people to do. I know this. We should not be looking down on any of the little ones that Christ died for. Doesn't matter who they are, where they meet. Christ died for that person. I better not be looking down on them.
Amen.
Somewhat along this same line is a thought from Francis Schaeffer. He said in a message, this was from a message, actually it's in a book, and Charles and I heard this message. It's called No Little Places, No Little People. That was the name of the message, title of the message. But in that message he said that we should take the low place and let God move us up. I'm talking to you new Christians now. All of us in one way or another, but especially the new Christians. Take the low place and let God move you up. Often the new convert has great ambitions in terms of changing the world and straightening others out. Now, I don't want to stifle any God-given desire, but often we are thinking about running when we haven't learned to walk yet. We're going to go to Africa and show those people how they should live the Christian life when we haven't even learned to pick up our own clothes or get the dishes done in a timely manner. You're going to love your neighbor there in New Guinea, and you haven't even loved your neighbor next door, across the street. We need to love the neighbors we have in our own community, not the ones we think we would have across the ocean. One way to take the low position and let God move you up is to seek to restore broken relationships and wrongs done prior to becoming a Christian, at least as much as possible. And that's humbling. It's taking the low position. If you go to a person that you've had a bad relationship with or have wronged somehow and try to tell them about how they need Christ, they will be rightly turned off if that's where you start. What they need to see is that God has humbled you enough that you will seek to make right what wrongs have been done. That's what they need to see first of all. That your ways, that your life and words really fit the reality of what you're doing. You've got to show them the reality of Christ, and the first reality is, I'm sorry for the way I treated you. Everyone may not respond positively, and it may be difficult at first. But as you continue to walk in faith, taking the low position, God will move you up, and your progress will be evident to those who are looking at your life. Talking about taking the low position, taking the humble position, and letting God move you up. And kind of along this same line, we don't want to come across as a new Christian know-it-all. Just because Christ has called you out of darkness into His light does not mean that you're now the spiritual authority and dispenser of wisdom for the rest of mankind. God's the only one that knows it all, and you're not Him. And besides that, whatever you know that's true, you got from Him. So there's no place for boasting or arrogance or pride. So be humble with your new God-given insight and the reality that God has shown you. As Paul said, Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. And here's something that comes as a startling thing sometimes, because we just don't think right as new Christians. We need to remember your non-Christian friend or family member may still have something to teach you in many areas of life. It's just amazing that we get our thinking so wrong, but it is true. Christians can learn things from non-Christians, and if we come across as if their thoughts are not important or worth listening to, we'll be building a barrier against the really important things we want to share with them. I mean, arrogance turns people off. So don't come across as a Christian know-it-all. On the other hand, I would say this to new Christians. They're often reluctant to share Christ because they think they don't know how to answer all the questions that are going to be asked them. Don't worry about that. It's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that question. Because you know something they need to know. Or better, I guess it would be to say you know someone they need to know. You know the one who forgives sins and gives peace with God. If the non-Christian is honest deep down, that will mean something to them. That you say, I may not know the answer to that question, but I know this. Christ died for my sins, and I know the way of having peace with God. Well, may God give us a humble courage. That almost seems like a contradiction, doesn't it? A humble courage. Well, it's not a contradiction, but it's supernatural. It takes God to do it. May God give us a humble courage as we keep our eyes on Christ, the author and finisher of our faith. He's the one that started you on this journey. He's the one that's going to take you through this journey and bring you right to heaven. Keeping our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith.